Hello, boys and girls. Today we are going to learn how to divide with decimals. Dividing with decimals is not hard. There are certain rules that you need to follow, but as long as you know your long division algorithms, you know how to do long division, learning to divide with decimals is not that bad. So first of all, the very first rule that we have when dividing with decimals, the decimal goes straight up into the answer. And so we're going to go ahead and solve this problem. So we solve the problem first, and then we deal with the decimals last. So we're going to divide 3 into 21. 3 into 21 is 7. And we bring down the 3. And 3 goes into 3 one time. And we do our subtraction, and now we have a remainder of 0 and no more numbers to bring down. So now we do need to address that decimal now at the very end. So when it looks like this, you're just going to pop that decimal up into the answer, and your answer will be 7 1/10, or 7.1. Okay, and the next rule is not so bad either. So I'll be right back in a few minutes. All right, so the next rule when we divide with decimals, we're going to look at this problem here, and you notice that they're both whole numbers, but we're going to go ahead and turn this into a decimal. So if there is no decimal, you add 1 to the end. For instance, 3 goes into 21 7 times. And we go ahead and do our algorithm, and then we're going to add a decimal. Okay, so this is how we add that decimal, and we bring down that 0. And 3 goes into 0 times. I know this is super simplified, but I'm just trying to break all the steps down so you understand where we get this answer. And so now I'll just keep going and putting zeros down, so I'll go ahead and stop. And so I have this decimal here that we need to address, so I am going to go ahead and pop this decimal up. And now my answer is 7.0, or 7, or 7 0/10. And we'll do the next one in a few minutes. All right, so the next rule when we divide with decimals, if there is a remainder, add 1 or 2 zeros to turn that into a decimal. So we're not going to turn this into a fraction, we're going to turn this into a decimal. So let's go ahead and do the algorithm. So 5 goes into 9 one time, and that's 5, and that becomes 4. Now, this is where I will go ahead and add those zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and extend my quotient bar, and I'm going to add a decimal and a 0. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and bring that 0 down. And now I have my new number to divide. And so now we can divide 5 into 40, and that would be 8. And that becomes 40, and we are finished. So we can keep going with 0 0 zeros if we want to. So now I'm finished dividing. Now we go ahead and bring that decimal up and straight up into the answer. And so my answer is 1 8/10, or 1.8. And so this is how we turn a division problem into a decimal problem. And I'll be right back. All right, so the last rule when dividing with decimals, when there is a decimal in the divisor, you move it so you have a whole number. Then you move the decimal in the dividend the same number of places. So we'll go ahead and follow that rule, but first we do need to solve our problems, and then we can scooch those decimals over. So let's go ahead and solve the problems. So I'm looking at 7 divided into 2. It doesn't fit, so I can put my placeholder 0 there. And the 7 goes into 29 4 times. 4 times 7 is 28. And then I do my subtraction, and I bring down that 4. So I do the problem just like normal. I just ignore those decimals. So now 7 divided into 14 is 2. And I get a remainder of 0. So now this is where I need to address those decimals. And let me see if I can Well, I don't have a different color marker with me. So let's go ahead and move them over. So let's go ahead and move this decimal to make that 7 tenths into a whole number. So that's a 1 hop. And now we're going to scooch it over here. And so when we move it over to the right. So now I'm going to pop that decimal up, and my answer is 4 2/10. Now, if we have a decimal that is moved over in one other spot, let's go ahead and do the algorithm like normal. We'll ignore the decimals, and I know it's going to be somewhat similar, but I want you to see the process. So let's go ahead and do the problem. So we're going to look at 7, and 7 does not go into 2, placeholder 0. 7 into 29, that would be 4 times. 7 times 4 is 28. And we do our algorithm, bring down the 4, so I have 14. So 7 goes into 14 2 times. Okay. Now this is 14, and that's 0. Now, this is where I will be adding an extra 0. We're going to include one of the other rules that we just talked about. And so let's go ahead and move this decimal over so that 7 becomes a whole number. And so that's 2 hops to the right. So that's 1, 2. Now I have to move this one over here. 1, 2. Okay, so now this decimal is going to be right over here. Now I see that I can add a 0 if I'd like. Okay, so if we want to continue with the decimal look, okay, so now I'm going to bring down that 0. Okay, and 7 goes into 0, 0 times, and that's 0, and I'm finished. So now I'm going to pop that decimal up. So now my answer is 42 0/10, or just plain 42. And that is how you divide with decimals.